I'm going to call the meeting to order. Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Secretary, call the roll.
Casper. Here. Malloy. Dunlop. Chalada.
Here.
Lloyd here. Barry.
Here.
Nenza.
Here. Okay, moving right along. 3.1 COVID-19 update.
Yes, thank you. So I'll refer you to the big screen for slides that will guide us through today's presentation. The board should have those slides in the executive content of board docs if you care to follow along at your place.
Actually, did you?
First, I'd like to just recap what we discussed on Sunday, July 18th at our special board workshop with the same topic. And it led to us drafting a very preliminary rough draft of what our reopening plan will be. The board has had a taste of that. Of course, we've had some things change since then, so that's the purpose of today. But on that Sunday, we decided that we would recommend masks but not require them for the unvaccinated. We talked about quarantining close contacts within 3 feet. Those students that were exhibiting symptoms and observing them at home in partnership with the parents who would be observing the child at home. We soon after a conversation I had with council, I had a conversation with President Nenza about whether or not that would be adequate, and perhaps we should start by quarantining everybody who's within 3 feet, and then if things continue to go well and our numbers continue to stay favorable, then we could consider observing. It's kind of moot now because of new clarification that's come out in the guidance since, but we'll get to that later. And also that we plan to cease doing daily health certification, certified daily health certification by parents for each individual students that we collected. That was clearly stated in the guidance that that's no longer necessary or not even necessarily recommended as effective. And we had been doing a voluntary temperature check as students arrived in the morning, which has always been over and above the recommendations of the guidance, and we had agreed that that could cease as well, among other things, but that gives you the gist of where we left that meeting. Since then, the IDPH released updated frequently asked questions, which got a bit more specific in clarifying the guidance that we were using to guide that conversation on that Sunday. And we've since heard clarification from the CDC about what they meant regarding masks, and they've in fact come in to say now that they believe that every school in America across the country should be masks for all vaccinated, regardless of vaccination status, nationwide. And that was really surprising to me, since it seemed to me that in the original guidance suggesting that masks were for all unvaccinated folks in the schools, that seemed to me to be a motivator to folks to get vaccinated that didn't want to wear masks. But they've kind of neutralized that incentive by recommending masks for all. And the board drew my attention to some changes in the frequently asked questions that came today. I had heard about the Test to Stay program, but I had not heard of the other 4 bullets in those guidelines that changed. Promotion of vaccination, it doesn't really seem like a change to me. Maybe they accentuated it more clearly. Alignment with CDC guidance, universal indoor masking in K-12 schools for all, regardless of vaccination status. That is certainly a change. Additional emphasis on the importance of offering in-person learning, regardless whether or not all the prevention strategies can be implemented. That's comforting and clarifying, not necessarily a change. but then revised definition of close contacts to guide quarantine procedures, which we'll talk about later today. And then the introduction of test to stay alternative. The other things that have changed since then is all of the metrics statewide and locally were in the yellow range when we met that Sunday, and now locally and statewide we're in the orange. So that's changed as well. And I think this might be a good time for me to say that I've learned a bit more about the new variant recently, and it seems that the severity of the symptoms to this variant tend to be less severe than the first three. However, the transmittability of it is substantially higher. They're comparing it now with the chicken pox, which is a famously easy to transmit virus. So that kind of led me to some thinking about, I'm not really concerned, I shouldn't say concerned, but through this whole ordeal, I've really been concerned about preserving life, the health of, the risk to health for the disease. And I do believe that a good portion of the adult population and a lesser portion of the 12 to 18 population, particularly those that are in high-risk groups but are eligible for the vaccine, have been vaccinated, which is comforting. And I also know that in all four of the current variants, that the likelihood of severe illness in children is very low. And learning that this variant tends to be even less severe in its presentation, particularly to kids, that gives me a good amount of comfort with regard to the health of our students in relationship to COVID currently. But the Ad Council met last week to talk about what happened that Sunday that we were together and how it would look with implementation. And their concern that I share is, depending on what quarantine guidelines we go with, the transmittability of this variant will likely result in a good amount of quarantining, depending on what quarantine strategy we use. And I am very much concerned about the effectiveness of and the quality of student learning during this phase of the pandemic if we have a lot of students that aren't actually present consistently in order to enjoy the improved instructional strategies that we intend to implement. So I just want to kind of set that tone so that that can wash over you a bit and a bit of a lens for you to look through as we proceed through the discussion. So because of those changes, the fact that we went from yellow to orange, the fact that the FAQs were quite different than our interpretation of those words, and the CDC's clarification, I thought it was important for us to rediscuss some of the major themes in the plan before we etch it in stone and make it a final document that we communicate to the community and also implement. And obviously the major themes in that are whether or not and whom will be wearing masks, what our rules are going to be for contact tracing and quarantining. And we talked a lot about how we want 146 style of instruction to return. Students turning and talking as an instructional strategy, cooperative learning, flexible grouping that changes throughout the period, students not being cohorted and passing to other classmates in other classes throughout the day. That's particularly important at the middle school, but there's a good amount of that at the elementary school as well. Those are the types of things that made administrators a bit concerned Again, not just from the health of the student or their family's perspective, but when it comes time, when someone presents with the disease, whether they have symptoms or not, and we have to go back 48 hours and get to the bottom of who's been within 3 or 6 feet, depending on the circumstances, away from that person over the past 48 hours, and they've been to multiple classrooms with different cohorts of students, and they've been grouping in different ways, mixing and interchanging throughout that instruction, that we're not sure whether or not we can do the contact tracing accurately or well, and to the extent that we can, it will result in much higher numbers even than what we were quarantining in the spring of last year. Because last year, everybody was 3 feet apart, everybody was staying in their desk, everybody was staying in the same cohort throughout the day. We weren't serving lunch. That's another factor too. The guidance says 3 feet whenever possible, and you've already heard that we can't keep all of our students 3 feet apart in any of our lunchrooms. We can keep a good number of them, and we could maybe even we could be strategic about who, based on parent wishes and that sort of thing. But in that circumstance, there's going to be a good number of students, even if their seats are assigned, they choose who they want to sit with, and they sit with the same folks every day. That's another category of folks that we need to consider when we're doing contact tracing. So those are all considerations for the board to play with today in the sandbox, so we can get to the bottom of how it is we want to go. And the next slide talks about the Test to Stay program, which is really interesting. I just want to raise this because it's a new theme, and I'm not advocating for it yet. I don't know, I don't understand it deeply enough to really have a position on it. But if the board found themselves saying, boy, after the FAQs, after what the CDC said, after what Jeff said about quarantine numbers, maybe we should consider wearing masks. Well, if we did wear masks, then the Test to Stay program would be a way where close contacts of an infected person who did not contract the disease would never need to quarantine. They would be tested every other day throughout the quarantine period, and as long as their test stayed negative, they wouldn't be excluded, and they'd be present in the school. One of the prerequisites to that program is wearing masks. So, I was trying to think of what are the themes that are dearest to the community, what are the themes that are dearest to the board, and I keep coming back to whether or not we wear masks and whether or not we quarantine who and how many we quarantine when a student comes to school COVID positive. And I can't really decide which one of those two things I like less. If we wear masks, we can quarantine very few. And we also can do all of those things in the classroom and throughout the day with very little risk for transmission and very little risk for large quarantine numbers, with the exception of lunch. 3 feet apart, they can't wear a mask when they're eating. There's going to be a good number of close contacts that occur at lunch. We're going to reinstitute Ivy League for before and after school care. They will follow whatever regs we set. They've agreed to that. However, we're not ourselves present in that environment. So we're going to need to be contact tracing in partnership with them on what happened before and after school. That's another variable that we have either way. But with the exception of that and the exception of lunch, wearing of masks allow us to do all of those other things and quarantine very few people. But I understand what a hot button topic masks are. But let's say we continue down the road that we started paving that Sunday afternoon, and just recommend that those that are unvaccinated wear masks, but not scarlet letter people, not ask for proof of vaccination status. We don't want to get into in the business of that. At least I don't think we do. If we go down that road, then it sure sounds like we have to follow the CDC guidelines with regard to contact tracing and quarantining. And if any one of the folks involved in a close contact situation are unmasked, then that means that radius is 6 feet, not 3. So we're going to have an opportunity to talk with Jeff Galitz from Hodges today and get to the bottom of to what extent does the CDC have authority? What are they asking us to do? What are they telling us to do? And if we don't follow to the letter what they suggest, what kind of teeth do they have? And the same for groups like the IDPH and ISB. We should get to the bottom of that and talk a little bit about exposure if we do too much, exposure if we do not enough, so we can start having a legal perspective about what the responsible decisions are to make. Since that Sunday, you've heard from a good number of community members, again, along the entire continuum of folks' opinions about how schools should be responding, and they go all the way from, you're crazy if you make us wear masks, or if you try and quarantine my child, all the way up to, it doesn't make any sense not to do those things. You have to do them. It's your responsibility to do them. So public opinion isn't a huge assist to us in making these decisions, but I just wanted to make the community aware that we're still hearing you, we're still reading every word that is sent by every resident, and considering those opinions on the continuum of opinions for this very divisive pandemic that we're in. So the next slide is me introducing Jeff, and us, I don't know, Jeff, if you'd like to make any introduction remarks based on what I just said, or if we want to just start with some of the things that I raised, and to what extent you think we have a bit of control over what we do, and what things you think are really by the letter of the law, kind of out of our control. And then I'm sure that the board has a good number of questions for you as well.
Yeah, well, let me start with just pointing out to the board, I'm sure you've seen this, but it's important to realize that the guidance last year, there's long been this tension between the guidance and the requirement. On the issue of masks, there was a requirement, both in the guidance document and in the governor's executive order. That requirement has been pulled back, and so now what we have is the guidance before us from the CDC, and then IDPH has adopted that same guidance. And those are all recommendations. Now it started out in early July as a recommendation with a lot of discretion to local school boards, and now as we've seen, it's sort of tightened back up to a strong urging, recommended, like it's a strong recommendation from those entities. But legally, it's important that there is not still on the books a requirement that mandates masks. Now, that's not me opining as to whether you should or shouldn't require masks, but what it means is that as a school board, you now have the discretion, or at least some discretion. The gray area is how much discretion you have. I think you still have the ability to make a decision about masks, frankly, either way. However, the thing that I think about from the legal perspective is whether you require masks or you make masks, completely optional, or something in between. If you play that out and it results in a legal challenge from a parent or from some kind of action by ISB, something along those lines, it's really coming down to a risk assessment. And when I think about the board's assessment of the risk and look at the guidance where it's really asking you to weigh 4 big buckets of information. 1 is the vaccination rates in your area, as Jeff has spoken to. 2 is the transmissibility rates. 3 is whether or not you're doing screening testing of some variety. And then 4 is the prevention strategies. Now, under that 4th bucket, there's a whole lot of things, and they're big ticket items. Mass quarantining, your sanitation, ventilation, all those sorts of things fall under prevention strategies. And I think from a legal perspective, it's important that the board is actually weighing those various factors and making whatever decision you decide. Because if you play it out and some action by the board is challenged in court or through the state board or something along those lines, we're gonna have to be able to prove up how it is that we were analyzing those factors and how those landed us at our, whatever decision you make. So in my view, there is flexibility to go either way on the core issue of masks. However, because it doesn't have the force of law as a legal requirement. However, I also caution the board to think about the guidance that exists now, with the strong urging, with the recommendation, with the should wear masks regardless of vaccination status. Those are, although not legally binding, they are setting publicly sort of a certain level of standard of care for the district to be considering. And if we get to the point where we're standing before a judge or before an ISB hearing, we're going to have to be able to justify how it is that we landed on that decision. So those are just a couple of the big picture comments that I wanted to make. But with that, I anticipate you all have some specific questions, and I'm happy to field any or all that you'd like to put in.
All right, so now it's time for the board. Any questions? Specifically, you want to start with just the mask topic, or you want to open it wide open? Okay, we're just gonna talk about the presentation and the return to school plan, so if anybody has questions.
Yeah, I mean, I have questions for him, certainly.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, I guess I would start with this, would be to say, we left here, whatever it was, a couple weeks ago, and I was personally very comfortable with the plan. Like, I didn't feel as though it was in any way reckless. I didn't feel as though we were putting anyone in any sort of danger. The only thing that has changed between now and then is the CDC guidance. So what I'm wondering, I don't know how familiar you are, Jeff kind of outlined what our plan was a little bit. What's our exposure? We just say, deal with it. We're comfortable with that. As a board, we're going to go ahead with our plan. What's our exposure if we did that?
Yeah, so first of all, whatever decision you land on, again, I recommend tying it to those factors and making sure that we can justify, based on those factors, here's why we're landing there. If we just take the approach of, I know you're exaggerating, but to hell with it, we're just opening the doors to everything.
Well, we're not opening the doors to everything. We're going with the plan that we discussed as a board publicly 2 weeks ago. So no, it's not to hell with it. It's not back to 2019. It's we're going to go with the mitigation strategies that we deemed appropriate to maximize learning for our kids in a safe environment. Right? That's essentially where I think we all landed. And so what I'm asking is what are the potential avenues of exposure if we did that?
Yeah, so...
And the degree of exposure.
Yeah, primarily it's going to depend on the facts of the case before. Playing out a scenario or two, if you have someone who challenges your decision about masks, and it's because, let me give you a specific scenario. If an individual child contracts COVID by coming to school, given the mitigation measures that you have in place, and the parent were to sue the district, it was a relatively mild case. Kid was out for a few days and then recovered. I think it's reasonably little exposure. I mean, the damages in that case are not dramatic. I think you've got a reasonable argument, not a guarantee, let me be clear, but a reasonable argument that the district should be entitled to immunity under the Tort Immunity Act. But if I take it to the other extreme, that was the very mild extreme. If I take it to the other extreme of a child shows up at school, contracts COVID, and falls ill and dies, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's as dramatic in worst case as it could get. We're going to still make the legal arguments about why you should be entitled to tort immunity. But I will say from, the way that courts interpret tort immunity, it's largely driven by the facts. And the more egregious the case is, the harder it is to get the judge to side with you, right? So, in a case like that, I don't know that I could quantify the damages, but it'd be hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more. And ordinarily, you'd look to your liability insurance carrier for support for that, but I don't think that's gonna get you very far in this particular case. So, I mean, those are the extremes of what you're looking at in terms of.
Okay, so if we're, I'm sorry, Dean, just ask, so I mean, I guess, okay, I mean, I don't think we feel like there's any legitimate chance that we're endangering anybody's lives, otherwise we wouldn't have agreed to that plan. So let's say that some catastrophic event did befall us. We're talking about damages in, yeah, I mean, because it's limited to compensatory damages, right? There are no punitive damages, even if there's...
Correct. Yeah.
So it's compensatory damages if it's established that we behaved recklessly, right? Isn't that the standard?
It's not the standard, no. There's, it's if you had a duty and you breached that duty, right? So the duty is going to come into play with, of course, we're going to look at the guidance that's before us.
Okay, so what the point is this. I mean, if we're talking about compensatory damages, I mean, we're talking about spending millions of dollars on an HVAC system, right? I mean, that's something we've decided to do, right? I mean, that's way more money than we'd be talking about in any potential damages, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just trying to get kind of relative sense of scale here.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a fair point in terms of the sense of scale, the dollars that could be at issue. Certainly, I mean, I know right now we're talking dollars and cents. There's also the consideration of just, you know, PR aspect and, you know, the optics of...
Oh, sure, certainly. But again, we're talking about a fairly remote scenario because, I mean, again, I don't think any of us would have left here 2 weeks ago if we thought there was even the slightest chance that that a serious illness was going to befall anyone as a result of our actions. So that's... Anyway, you were going to say something.
I just had along that scenario lines, what would be the burden of proof? Last spring, we quarantined over 500 kids. Exactly 2 came down with COVID, and we don't know where they got it from. How would it be determined that it was because that they got it at school?
Yeah,
As opposed to they could have went to Lollapalooza, who knows? All these towns are having their summer fests. The harshest criticism we had about our workshop 2 weeks ago was it was going on concurrently with a block party down the street.
Yeah. Well,
I think I'm making my point.
right. Certainly, and Jeff and I spoke about those numbers, so he filled me in to how many students you were quarantining and how few of them showed any symptoms or, you know, came down with COVID. So certainly that is a consideration. If we were litigating this, you know, we put those numbers before the judge to show, really to demonstrate the reasonableness of our actions, to show that we indeed were, you know, again, going back to considering these factors, we were considering these factors. And when we're looking at quarantining, right, we have a year's worth of data, and that data yielded that, I don't know, less than 1% or whatever it is.
1/2 of 1%.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that would be a huge factor in explaining, you know, our position to the judge.
So I want to talk just for a second about the compendium of mitigation strategies. You know, a lot of public attention and a lot of the board's time has been spent on specifically around masks, but that is one of a series of mitigations, and as we've seen in the guidance, which changed an hour ago, quarantining and close contacts depend on masking distance-wise, is my understanding. If we talk a lot, and we do talk a lot, about getting back to a somewhat normal school experience as much as we can, with students changing classrooms, with kids going to lunch and actually being able to have a conversation, those types of things, I would be interested to hear your thoughts about how masks play into that, right? Because I've read it and I'm trying to keep up as fast as I can, but the 3 to 6 foot rule and close contacts and quarantining, because I know that's a big question in our community about which students we have to keep home and how we have to keep them home. So can you talk a little bit about how masks play into that, and then what that looks like in our current reality?
Yeah. So I think there's 2 big points where masks play into those issues. One is the radius, and Jeff spoke about this briefly a few moments ago, which is The general radius is, we're looking at 6 feet as close contact, but there's an allowance for only 3 feet if the students are wearing masks, right? So if you have students wearing masks, you're looking at a smaller radius, you're looking at fewer close contacts that would need to be quarantined in the first place. So that's one way that it plays out. The other way that it plays out is this new test to stay strategy, which again, Jeff outlined, that you're going to have you would have the flexibility to keep some of the students who would have been close contacts, you would keep them in school, but that's contingent on them having been wearing masks and on some testing.
And so without masking, it's a hard 6 feet.
Correct, and you don't have that test to stay strategy as an
Correct.
option that's available to you.
Okay.
Okay, can I ask a question about that? In the memo on page 8, the fourth dot point down on option 4 where it lays out the test strategy parameters, it reads, because students are engaged in its test to stay protocol or exposed to a confirmed case of COVID-19, they must wear a mask while indoor at school, regardless of the mask policy at school. If we had a mask optional and it's not eligible for this program, why would they even put that in? Or is it just bad editing from the slap together at the last second, changing the rules right before school starts again?
Yeah, I wasn't the drafter of this, but I would apply this the latter of those points, probably editing. Because the first bullet point, the first sub-bullet point,
Yeah, that's what they changed. That's different from the version from yesterday. Right.
yeah, I know, admittedly, this whole thing is changing by the day. So, but I look at that, the first bullet point, to me, is crystal clear about this is not an option if you're not requiring universal masking. As to the last part of that fourth bullet point, the last phrase that you're asking about, it's a fair ask. I can't explain it other than probably either poor editing or maybe they just weren't thinking about that detail.
Can I ask a question about that for the test to stay strategy? Is it your opinion then that if we were having students wear masks, and then we would have a testing system in our schools, and even vaccinated students would have to be vaccinated, or would you have to be tested?
I don't think the test to stay strategy has to have a universal testing option or component to it. But the students who otherwise would have had to quarantine, those students would have to be tested. Days 1, 3, 5, and 7.
At school, and even if they're vaccinated?
Not if they're vaccinated,
Okay.
or if they've been positive in the last 90 days. But yes, at school, and only if they want to stay. Like parents who don't want their child to be tested, they wouldn't have to be tested. They could just quarantine traditionally. And then they would just stay in touch with their learning asynchronously.
And that would be my next question. We would administer, our nurses would administer these tests.
Yeah, and this is much different than the testing for all SHIELD, U of I program. This isn't anything like that. This would just be tests for close contacts of students who wanted to stay in school despite the fact that they were
Right.
exposed.
But the availability of these PCR rapid antigen tests, is it going to be like these COVID tests where, I mean, is it something we can get our hands on readily?
We started talking about that today. It's not clear whether or not we can. I mean, the pitch sure sounds like we can. I mean, the people who are pushing it, but we haven't tried to buy them.
Okay.
These are the saliva tests, aren't they?
This is actually a nasal swab. It's just inside the nose, though. They don't have to go all the way to the depths of the sinus cavity. But we would want nurses, we would want RNs to administer,
Which we currently have.
which we currently have in all the facilities.
It feels a little bit like our hands are tied, in my opinion. I mean, it feels like, I'd like to say, well, exactly what the CDC says, that we recommend it. But if we do that, on the other side, I want kids in school. And so we can't do both. If that's what, right? Is that how you're interpreting it? We can't do, but we can't, And how am I supposed to say, I don't know how to choose the option that I want kids in school as much as possible, so that's my opinion.
I mean, that's the only reason why I personally have wavered on masks. I want all of the good instructional strategies, and I want as fewer kids quarantined as possible through this next chapter. And if you do masks, you can do test to stay, if we can get them and do it. And that would result in only infected kids not being present in the school building. Like, that's what we've wanted all along. What I really want is a way to achieve that and still give people choice, but I just can't fathom a way to do that.
Do we know what 230's current
Yeah.
stance is?
So, I talked to 230 today, and I witnessed 228 make a statement in a meeting. They both have mask recommended but not required as a step in their plan, but they intend to start the school year masked.
228 parents today got a PDF that masks are required for every person, so it's not recommended anymore.
Yeah, no. So what I'm saying is that they both intend to require masks for all.
Okay.
But they have the strategy of mask recommended only as one of the steps that they could go through if their metrics stay good. So, we were talking about how the original guidance suggested that you peel away one layer at a time and measure. If your numbers are still good, peel another one. If they're still good, peel another one. If they start getting bad, add one. If they stay getting bad, add another. So that was the way, at least 230. I'm not familiar with 228's plan intimately, except that they intend to start the school year masked for all, regardless of status. But 230 intends to start masked for all, regardless of status, but they have a mechanism for when it's time to roll one back, to roll that mask one back to recommended should for unvaccinated and then optional for vaccinated.
And just to be clear, I understand that their population is different than ours. All of their students have the option to get the vaccine now as high school districts, so that plays a little different. We have a majority of our students that are just not eligible for vaccination as of yet.
Yeah, I think that's a really important part, because I'm seeing memes on social media of the crowd at Lollapalooza, as Dean mentioned earlier, and using that as kind of fodder for, don't you dare tell me I have to wear a mask in school. And, I mean, it makes a broad point, but the things that the author doesn't consider is that Lollapalooza is, one, entertainment, two, very optional, and public school is required to serve all students. So, and we don't have a remote option in our plan this year. So, you have to come to school to get your education. So, again, I'm not trying to make a pro-mask argument. I'm thinking through what the first couple of weeks of school are going to be like, and when we've got one student that tests positive, and last year it resulted in 2 or 3 up to 15, 16 quarantines when we were sitting in rows with masks on and distanced at lunch. And now we're going to be 3 feet whenever possible, but intermixing of kids and all the things I said earlier. I mean, one positive student could lead to 30 students, I don't know how many, many students quarantined. And if it's anything like last year, all, or statistically all, of them will be healthy and still excluded. So the merits of the Test to Stay program really raise my eyebrows, because I like the idea of anyone who is uninfected getting to stay, but that requires everybody to wear a mask, which is a...
Are we physically unable to get our hands on tests if we don't have a mask policy, mandatory mask policy? I mean, are they like...
No, I'm sure that the market is I'm sure we don't have to pass a test in order to get them. I think if we're willing to buy them, we can get them. I think I know where you're going.
I'm just curious, I mean, what if we just didn't implemented everything except to say that we're making all close contacts eligible regardless of masking status? I mean, it seems silly to say that someone who's deemed a close contact but wearing a mask is somehow a lesser close contact than someone who's not wearing a mask. I mean, I'd be curious to know the study that they cite to justify this decision. I mean, but the truth is, whatever. I mean, they say it's local control. It's not. They're trying to bully us into masks.
Right, exactly.
And it's kind of, I mean, in a sense, part of me was just sort of going to be like, I don't want to participate in this conversation because it makes almost a farce that we actually have any kind of a say in this. Because the truth of the matter is the CDC and the IDPH and the ISB, they want to have the say, but they don't want the responsibility. They want us to take the responsibility for their decision. So, I mean, that's kind of, I'm sorry, I'm venting, it's not helpful. Jeff, I do have a question, that does lead into a question though. I mean, what does ISB have over us? I mean, if we say, let's say we say we're going to follow this exact plan, except we're going to say masks are optional and we're going to say you can test to stay if you're deemed to be a close contact regardless of masking status. So basically we're following these guidance, but with like essentially one wrinkle. What leverage does ISB have over us in that situation?
Well, you probably are familiar with the fact that ISB, about a month ago, was starting to go after those districts who were early adopters of a mask optional policy. ISB was taking the approach that those districts were going to lose their recognition status, and that would risk, the biggest thing that would risk is the state funding to that school district. That obviously would be a huge issue, but when the July 9th guidance came out, granting local discretion, ISB then backed away from that position and is no longer going after the recognition status of the school district. Conceivably, they could sort of renew that tactic and go after school districts who are doing anything less than they feel is the standard. Don't hold me to this because this is just conjecture, but I don't think ISB is, they haven't really been in the business of policing school districts on this over the past year. I don't think they're going to this year. I think where ISB has gotten involved with individual school districts over the past year has been when districts are intentionally and sort of blatantly flouting the guidance that has been put out there. I don't think that's what you're doing here. I mean, in the plan, even if you're deviating from the guidance in certain areas, it's not an all-out, we're just abandoning all precaution. That is not the approach you're taking. And I don't anticipate that ISB would go after you. So I don't view that as a huge threat. However, I mean, if they did, as I said, the big issue is recognition status, and that would impair your receipt of state funds going forward in future years.
What would that do to our students' diplomas? I mean, if we're decertified...
It's not decertified, so I don't think it would impact the validity of their transcripts, but it would have the impact on your funding, as I said.
But even those school districts that said, we're not doing anything anymore, that were threatened by ISB, they were given 45 or 90 days for corrective action.
Correct.
It's not like they just removed their charter the day after they got the letter. So you could change course probably without jeopardy if that came down.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, ISB has not been, whatever you want to think about their guidance, they've not been heavy-handed in coming after school districts for non-compliance. That's not to say that they won't in the future, but they have taken sort of a measured approach in terms of enforcing any guidance.
And it's important to remember, too, that if we don't require masks for the unvaccinated, or we don't require masks for all, you're not saying masks optional. What we would say is exactly what the CDC and the IDPH say, that masks are, that unvaccinated folks should wear a mask. Whereas CDC says, I mean, all is a little bit less ambiguous, but Rick, you talked a little bit about the individual responsibility of citizens, students and their parents, to make decisions based on what they believe. So, Jeff, I don't know how you feel about what our obligation is to enforce the behavior of an individual, because there's jeopardy in the other direction there too. You know, if we say all unvaccinated folks will mask, shall mask, I mean, I don't know that we really want to be in the business of disciplining students who aren't wearing a mask because their parents sent them to school without one because they told them not to wear it. Like, we're in the business of teaching kids, not punishing them. So, you know, that raises other concerns when we get to the implementation level with administration is, you know, in the middle school, 7th and 8th graders, a good number of 7th and all the 8th graders have had it available to them, not really old enough yet to have free will to just choose to get vaccinated or not because get vaccinated or not because of their age, but at least it was available to those folks and their family can make a decision. But in an elementary school, it'd be quite foolish to say that we don't know who's unvaccinated in the building when all the kids are 11 and under. So we're going to have a different round of difficult decisions to make when there is a 2 to 12 vaccine, because then we won't know who's vaccinated or not in our elementary schools. Now, we've said before, as an employer, we have the authority to ask employees if they're vaccinated or not. We haven't. We've chosen not to. And as a school, we also have the authority to ask students whether or not they're vaccinated, and we haven't, and have chosen not to. I think we intend to continue, but that scarlet letter scenario where a mask is a label of unvaccinated, I think we want to avoid that altogether. And in that environment, it's got to either be masks for all or masks should be worn by the unvaccinated, and the onus is on the student and the family to do that. Because otherwise we're the mask police. And we're good at a good number of things, and we could probably get good at that. I don't have any interest or the stomach for that to be what we do for the next few months. So here we are.
For the test to stay, does it say what they would do if a child came back positive after they've been, say, test 5, you know, the 5th day?
Yeah, at that point, they would quarantine under the normal quarantine rules.
But it would be the same if we did the same thing, you know, if we didn't do it would be the same thing, correct?
Well, it would be a little bit different because people who are positive are actually isolated, not quarantined, and that's a 10-day and 24-hour symptom-free without fever-reducing drugs, whereas a quarantine is one of 3 different things, but the one that we've been using is 14 days, and provided there's no development of symptoms, then a student can return. So,
Right, but I'm saying if they were to test, if we did the test to stay, and they tested on the 5th day and that child came back positive, why is it any different than if we just did the test to stay ourselves? is what
it's
I'm
really
saying.
not any different, except the potential for infecting others during the interim.
I mean, because they're going to go back and find all the people who they were in close contact with
And we
even
would do it all
before
over
those
again.
days, and it's going to be the same thing, correct?
We would do it all over again. And that student who turned positive, who tested positive on day 5 of their quarantine period, their 10-day clock would start that day. They would need to be 10 days and fever-free for 24 hours in order to return.
Right, which would be fine, because we know by then they are in
It would
fact
be real
positive.
simple, real similar to a 14-day quarantine period from the first day of close contact. The difference is during those 5 days, there's a good chance that student was positive the whole time and just didn't test positive until day 5, because the person that they caught it from has been removed on day 1, day 0. So in those 5 days, Now, we'd only have to go back 48 hours for contact tracing, but we would be doing contact tracing all over again, and then putting a new group of folks into the test to stay program. But yeah, for that child in your scenario, the time on the bench, so to speak, would be very similar to if we just quarantined the old-fashioned way.
This is actually a good segue into just a question I had. There's some, what I thought, some curious language in here, and it could be that I just don't understand the quarantine laws. It said that we would ask someone to voluntarily quarantine, and it doesn't feel like we're asking. I didn't feel like there was ever anyone had a choice about that. So I'm curious if you could give me an idea, why did they write it that way?
Yeah, well, again, I'm not the one who wrote it, so I don't know why, but I noted the word ask, and I also found it curious. Certainly this is an area that I have seen in other districts that some people are questioning the authority of the health departments to quarantine and isolate folks. I'm not the one advising those departments, but they did use the word ask. I didn't notice the word voluntarily, but yeah, it's like they wrote it as, we'll ask them to quarantine, even though it certainly seems that it's an expectation.
Hold on.
The IDPH language does say, I didn't remember the word ask, but it did say, close contacts quarantine voluntarily. That was how the sentence ended. Now, I don't know if that implies that a student or their family could refuse, and therefore we would be required to let them in the doors. Like, I still feel like we've got a good amount of authority about who enters the building.
Yeah, so there's a couple points to that. One is, I suppose if they ask and someone refuses, there's two different issues. One is your issue and one is IDPH's issue. IDPH, there is a mechanism in the law where they can go to court and get a court order requiring someone to be quarantined or isolated. I have not seen them doing that, but that is a possibility. But from your perspective, whether or not a close contact quarantines or isolates in the true definition of the word, meaning they're at home, sort of secluded from the rest of the world, is actually not your responsibility to ensure. You don't have to ensure that the student is sitting at home and knocking out. But the issue for you as a school district is whether or not that student is allowed to be in school.
Okay.
And there are a number of cases where, COVID is a novel new thing, but there are situations where students who are sick, you have rules about if you're sick with such and such, you're expected to be out for a certain period of time. So it's not all that different conceptually, but the true enforcement piece really falls to IDPH. If a parent or someone is refusing quarantine, it would be up to IDPH to get the court order. It's not your obligation to enforce what they're doing on the home front.
So there's no question that we have the authority to say you can't come in?
I wouldn't say there's no question. There's almost nothing in this realm that I could say there's no question about.
No, but I mean, it's not any different than any other illness. We don't have any, if someone else has strep throat, we say you can't come to school, but we don't check to see if they're at home.
Correct.
And this would be under that same.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, you have general authority to implement rules for safety and health and welfare for your students and staff, so it would fall under that.
So when we talk about the population of students that we do have that are eligible and able to have the vaccine, admittedly a small percentage of our students, we've talked about how we are not going to require vaccination status, we're not asking for it. I'm wondering if there is a way to ask parents that are willing to voluntarily contribute their vaccination status to the school, especially under the guise of contact tracing and close contacts. So, if I am an administrator and I have a field of students that were a close contact with this person, under our current system, I would not know which of those students are vaccinated or not. And so then, when it comes to if we can leave the vaccinated students in school and we do not have to quarantine them, that's, I think, another step for the administration.
We do that.
We do that, okay.
So
great.
that's relatively brand new because it happened really late in the spring.
Okay.
But what we do ask parents when we identify a student as a close contact is, has your child been vaccinated? Now, they don't have to tell us.
Sure.
And if they don't tell us, then we have to quarantine them as if they're unvaccinated.
Right.
But, no, they typically would tell us because they want their child in school.
Sure.
And if they're vaccinated or they've been infected in the last 90 days, they don't have to quarantine as long as they're symptom-free.
Right.
So that's another question that we ask is, has your child been a confirmed positive case in the last 90 days?
Sure.
And if they say yes, then they don't have to quarantine either.
Okay, I guess I was wondering if it would take an extra step out of that for the administration if we already knew, if we asked parents when school started, if you were willing, not to mandate, but saying, if you're willing to share your students' vaccination status, whether they are or whether they aren't, that would maybe give the administration a leg up in that scenario so that they're not having to make all those phone calls. But I'm not sure how.
Yeah, being proactive about it.
Be a little proactive about
I
it.
think we'd still probably want to call them and let them know that they were a close contact so they can pay attention to see, because there are some people
Sure.
that are vaccinated that are being reinfected. But it would certainly help a number of other things that we do when we're talking about not having room for everyone at 3 feet in the cafeteria. Well, certainly a group of vaccinated students would be really easy to put hip to hip on a table and it not be a risk to them. But
Right.
again, we don't want to be identifying kids to others about who's vaccinated or not, but it certainly would be, you could kind of duck, goose kids a little bit, vaccinated and unvaccinated, at least at the 7th and 8th grade level, and prevent some
It's just something to
future
consider.
quarantining, yeah.
Something to consider. Okay. Other thoughts? Okay.
So, the next slide is just what changes would you like us to make to the plan before, other than editing and making it good. But what substantive changes would you like to see with the plan between now and next Monday, which is when I'm going to ask you to ratify the plan so that we're ready to implement on the first day of school? You know what's in it now. Again, my main concern with the plan as written right now is the number of folks that are going to need to be excluded due to being a close contact, even if we just do 3 feet.
I share that concern. I'll say that I do have a grave concern about us returning with even strongly recommending masks for the unvaccinated. Number one, I think that option's on its way out, potentially, as we see the guidance changing, as we see stronger language coming our way. I have a concern that we would write a plan and have things ready to go, and then in 2 weeks, that option disappears on us. I have concerns about that, and I do share concerns about the number of quarantined students. And, we talked at length over the entire pandemic about students in quarantine and how we serve them and making sure that they're served appropriately all the time. And again, admittedly, how large that number was, and we did not have students falling ill in high percentages for that. If we have a mechanism as a school board that allows us to keep those numbers low, allows our students to experience, again, a little more normal school, I would think that we should seriously consider it. I know that is definitely not popular with a lot of people, and I know that it would take a lot of consideration by this board, and obviously the will of the board rules all. So, my personal opinion is my personal opinion, but I have concerns about the number of kids that we are going to end up quarantining this fall if we do not follow what is currently in the guidance. And again, I'm also concerned that the guidance is going to change again. That's where I sit.
Thank you, Darcy, for that. And the other thing that's really changed since that meeting on a Sunday a couple weeks ago is the metrics have changed significantly. All 3 of our communities in the state were all in the yellow. All 3 and the state are now in the orange. Now, I don't personally feel real motivated by 62 out of 100,000 instead of 47 or whatever it was on that Sunday. That doesn't seem substantially different enough to change the color. But in front of a judge, in front of public opinion, certainly the media, orange is a brighter color than yellow. That's the way the health departments have metriced positivity. So One of the things that we said is that we would start the year masks recommended, and then if the metrics change, we would reconsider re-adding some of the layers of mitigation. And one of the things that we discussed as a measure was that blue, yellow, orange, red. So the problem I see, the reason why the doctors are writing all of these articles about the transmittability of this variant is because the way they describe it, just everybody in the area is catching. If there's a positive person and there's other folks in the area, they're catching it. And the symptoms might be mild. It's got more asymptomatic kids than the other three, and the other three had a lot. But one positive turns into a dozen positives really quickly with this one. So it doesn't surprise me that we moved from yellow to orange, if maybe those studies were motivated by the increase in positivity, or maybe the other way around, I don't know. But certainly I see this as, I don't think we're going to just dip right back down to the yellow next week. Like, I really think that we're going to be brighter orange a week or two from now than we are now, but I don't have a crystal ball either. But I think it would be reasonable for the board, if you wanted to reconsider our close contact tracing quarantine strategy that's in the plan, or our mask strategy in the plan, that being orange instead of yellow would be a motivation for you to do so. I'm also happy to implement the plan as written today, with the understanding that there's going to be big numbers of quarantine with every positive case.
Okay, so I'm going to go around, and we're going to see where we sit, and then we'll go from there. So, Dean, I'm going to start with you.
Well, the goal from March 13, 2020 was to get the kids back in school. That's what we fought so hard for all spring, was to get them back. And now that we got them back, we got to keep them back. I think getting them in school is the number one most important point, is keeping them in school. Getting those tests, I would urge that we get those tests tomorrow, if we could. Add any air purification thing that we can get to each classroom and keep them in school. And if it has to mean, we can revisit this every month. That's what I thought we were going to do all along, was every month we were going to revisit where we were at with this thing. If there's a way to do it without masks, then let's do it without with this plan, but apparently we can't, without incurring 1,000 kids quarantined? Is that what I'm hearing? Is that we're at least it's gonna be more than 500?
There was 500 in a little over 2 months.
By the rules.
But we're also going to likely have a childhood vaccine by late fall, so that'll be another factor that strategically or theoretically would reduce transmission. So, but in the first quarter of the year, I think that we've got pretty much the ground rule.
And they could change this thing in the next hour or two. Like they did yesterday, it seemed obvious we had a way out, the test to stay. But they took that away this afternoon, correct? This was this morning, this afternoon, they released this latest one?
They did, and there were a couple of the bullets that actually softened their language a little bit, like, hey, don't use how strictly we're writing these other bullets to mean that you have to do them all in order to be in person, because in person is the number one priority. So they did say, don't stop being in person just because you can't do all of these things. But can't is different than unwilling to, or can't is certainly different than choosing not to. We're going to be judged on based on what we could or couldn't do that we did or didn't. And then the other one was the introduction of this test to stay, which is the best thing I've ever read. I mean, other than it requiring masks for all for you to be eligible for it, quarantine is my least favorite thing about it. I mean, especially with us being 0 for 500 on infection in the spring. kicking healthy kids out of school, that's my least favorite thing. Like, I'd wear 2 masks if everyone got to be here for quality instruction every day. But you know, quarantine isn't a hot button issue the way masks are, because right now everybody's kid's healthy. Quarantine only becomes unpopular when you're one of the 28 kids that happened to sit next to a positive kid yesterday, and you got the call today. And if we'd only made everybody wear masks, we could have just tested the kid and he could have stayed in school. That's how I'd feel as a parent if you told me you were going to toss my healthy kid for 14 days because of some rule. So, right now, everyone's like, I don't want to wear a mask. Quarantine whoever you want, because it's not going to happen to me. And once it happens to them, that's when quarantining becomes their least favorite thing in the world. Well, I see that happening in real time to hundreds of kids. So the thought of asking vaccinated people to put their masks back on, especially when they're not in the presence of the unvaccinated, that doesn't make any sense to me. But with how many people that are vaccinated that are carrying this Delta to other people who aren't, and that's a real thing, like that's not made up, that's the doctors, not the politicians saying that, then I would expect a vaccinated teacher in the presence of unvaccinated students to wear their mask if the students were wearing them. But when I have a cabinet meeting with 5 vaccinated adults in a room that's in a building that has no kids in it, asking them to mask doesn't make any sense. Like a teacher with another vaccinated teacher in a teacher's lounge or in their classroom with the door closed, it doesn't make any sense to me to ask those folks to mask. But the guidance isn't saying we have to mask any of those folks. Well, I mean, actually it is. It's saying everybody all the time. But for this test to stay, the important factor in the test to stay is that the positive party and the close contacts of the positive party were all masked at the time of exposure. That's the magic in this guidance that makes those people that were within the radius eligible for test to stay. Whatever. The idea that we can swab a kid's nose and he gets to go to school for 14 days instead of sit at home for 14 days, and the fact that they don't have to, if their parents are against testing or whatever, they can opt out and we can still asynchronous them during the quarantine period, so there's no us making you do something that you don't want to do. I mean, I'm kind of back in Camp Mask now because of, we could go from quarantining hundreds and hundreds and hundreds to quarantining just those that have the virus if we put our masks on and do this program, if we can get the kits and train the nurses. Like, there's work to do, but I'm eager to do that work because everyone gets to go to school every day.
Okay, Rick?
I guess what I'm saying is, could we revisit this next Monday when we have more information? If we have information about this test to kit, test
After it changes
to
again.
stay, and whether there will be 5 more changes to the rules here in between now and next Monday.
Well, if there's changes to the rules, we'll be updating each other in real time, of course. But of course we can revisit it. You're going to be asked to vote on it, but I need to know what you want in the draft plan that you're going to have in board docs to vote on. I have to write it one way or the other initially, but of course we'll be revisiting whatever you want. As far as the kits go, Dean, we'll get the kits. Like, if they're available anywhere.
That's the thing, if they're available. Would we have an idea if they're available?
Well, Marion asked if I wanted her to order them today, and I said, ask me tomorrow.
Yes,
You have
you
to
did.
wait weeks, but let's let 4:30 happen, and then you can order them. She wanted to just buy them all right away, and if I wasn't going to see you guys later today, I'd be like, buy them, and then, we can gift them to another district if we decide not to do it. It's just so much better than any of the other quarantining options, because only the sick go home. But you have to wear a mask. I personally think that's a small price to pay for all the kids to stay in school all the time, but I also understand how masks are polarizing, and I just appreciate that you guys are willing to volunteer and sit on this board and receive the arrows that you're receiving. from folks on both sides. So I know it's a difficult decision. I'm ready to implement whatever you decide.
For me, it was getting the kids back in school. That has been number one, it had the tip of the spear all along, and keeping them there hopefully that this is going to be a very temporary thing.
Well, that's the thing. You know, if you do masks, and you do test to stay, and all the close contacts are testing negative on days 3, 5, and 7, or whatever it is, and we put together a few weeks of that, and we can demonstrate to the court and to mankind and to each other that our close contacts still aren't catching the virus at school, and we can prove it. We've got 3 tests per kid that prove that you're not catching it at school, then you reconsider the masks then.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And we've already got the kits then. I mean, maybe if some folks, if you decide whenever to roll the mask thing back, and we still have the kits, we could still test close contacts
Sure.
even if they weren't masked. And if they're all negative, why would you ever put a mask back on again? Now, if they're all positive, you may have just proved that masks work in schools, and maybe we should put them back on. But then you'll have data, our data, with our people.
Rick?
Sorry, I'm monologuing.
Fine. Well, I agree with Dean that having the kids in school is definitely the most important thing. My opinion would be that we basically go ahead with test to stay, and that we say we strongly recommend masks. I mean, honestly, I know that's not what the guidance says. I don't really care. I would be open to voting for this plan that if the plan included concrete steps to say that we have metrics to say by like our October committee of the whole meeting, that we have concrete steps to potentially say that we feel we've made a case that we don't need masks and can do tests. I want to see a path to no masks and test to stay within, like, that would be, then I would vote for. I mean, we could start the year with masks and test to stay if we have in the plan a pathway. Because I'm not hearing much at all. I'm not hearing much exposure. I mean, you've outlined it, and I appreciate, Jeff. You didn't say there was no exposure, but it's not huge. And I would sleep well at night feeling like that would be a safe environment for kids to go to attend school, and also the best learning environment. Let's be honest. I mean, if they didn't write this, we wouldn't be talking about it. Right? I mean, this is just IDPH, CDC, changing their minds every hour. I don't think there's new studies coming out every hour. They're just making it up as they go. So, I mean, from my perspective, I would be willing to, I love test to stay. I think it's silly that they have this, that they somehow tie it to masking. I can't imagine what the why some close contacts would be eligible and other close contact situations would not. You would think a close contact is a close contact. And so, from my perspective, I would say, okay, fine, we can start the year with masks and with test to stay, but I want some serious thoughts starting immediately about how we transition out of that. That would be my preference.
I would like to see it that's what I had in mind. Our October committee meeting would be 5 weeks in?
Between
6 weeks?
7 weeks in. 7 weeks in.
I think that's a pretty decent
6 weeks.
chunk of time, correct?
Yep.
Where we can revisit it at that point and have that in the plan? Would that be possible?
Certainly. And we'll probably need to rewrite ESER 3 to include some additional health clerks to help with the testing load. If we've got a large quarantine number of kids, we may need more, either people to clerk the health office while the RN is doing the tests.
I would say whatever you need.
I figured you would.
Julie?
Yeah, I agree. I want kids in school as much as possible. I am not I'm in favor of recommending masks. With the last committee of the whole, I stated that I wanted just to say what the CDC said, which was to recommend. However, I feel like I've already stated that our hands are tied, and so I like the option that Rick just said to have something in the plan about how to, whatever the metrics are, to move out of masks.
Patty?
I agree. Yes, I want to see the kids in school, but I also want to see the mask go as soon as possible. You know, if that's October, if that's the quickest we can do it, then
Okay.
stick with October.
Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, so now we are going to move into public comment. As I stated last time, I'm very well aware of the polarizing opinions on all of the things that we discussed tonight, not just masks, but vaccinations and COVID itself in some cases. We strive to have a very respectful and very open dialogue during public comment. I ask that you observe that. We are here to hear your opinions. There will not be a back and forth dialogue between the audience and the board. We're here to receive your thoughts in your 3-minute allotment, and then we move forward. Now, we are listening, we do hear you, and for those that are watching at home, you do not have public comment time now, but you are welcome to email the board. We do see those emails. I know that some people have said some things about that in all of the places where we communicate, and I want to reinforce to you that we do see those emails. So I am going to open for public comment. Again, you're limited to 3 minutes. I'd like you to stand, state your name, and sign in on the sheet, and I will be timing everyone, and that is in the nature of fairness. We are going to make sure that everyone sticks to 3 minutes. All right, thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Ken Price. Recently moved my family to Tinley Park for this district because I felt that giving my children the best opportunity for an education was here in this location. If the metrics change, like you said, metrics have changed in 2 weeks. If the metrics change in October, what we saw last year, and then again, I'm not asking the board, but I want you to think about this. If the metrics change and they get worse, the idea of pushing for no masks obviously will then have to be tabled. I think that that would be a logical step. Moving forward, I absolutely love this testing for testing to stay. I think it's an excellent idea. I think you might be wrong on a vaccination by late fall. I'm not seeing any of that. I'm seeing much later in the winter, so it only makes sense that we have our masks. We have masks on because we have data that shows that masks are effective. And it's a simple thing to do, especially if we are so close to the end of this damn race. We're almost there. It's like, why sit down and stop? I mean, we're almost done. We've almost got it through. Most of these families here have lost somebody, or, we've kept our children at least safe enough. You said, I believe it was clear, I can't ask for clarification, 500 kids in 2 months had to be quarantined. This option that you guys are now discussing would get rid of it. We wouldn't have to worry about those kids being at home. I teach children with autism. My wife is a kindergarten teacher. We had a first grader and a kindergartner in our home. That was 4 people on Zoom. We cannot do quarantine again. We cannot do it at all. We got through it. We didn't kill each other. But we can't do that again. And if this option gives us a pathway where my kids can be in school and my wife can go to her school and I can teach my students, then let's just do it. We got a couple more months. I mean, hell, if we can make it to Christmas and everybody can have their damn vaccination, what's the point? It's a mask. It's just a mask. We're not asking you to take a bullet for your country. We're just asking you for a mask on your face. It's nothing a bit patriotic. It's what you do.
30 seconds.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's David Saraki. I'm the one that gets really nervous when I talk. I'm sure you remember me from the last meeting. I just wanted to say, it seems like not much has changed with the guidance in that it got stronger. The wording got a little stronger, that they're more encouraging the masks, but not much has changed. At the last meeting, everyone pretty much it seemed like there was a general consensus that we were going to move forward with mask optional, put in a lot of mitigation efforts. If things change, increase more. It seems like today, the big worry is that we're going to have too much quarantining and too many of the kids are going to get quarantined. Well, we've just been handed an amazing gift in that test to stay. If we would have had that last year, almost no one would have missed school at all. So my thinking is make the mask optional, include the test to stay. That way, it seems like we're getting really hung up on none of those were rules that he brought up with. These are all guidance, you should do this. They're saying the masks along with the test to stay would be great, but they're not saying one has to go with the other or that this is the rule. So why not do the optional mask like we said and also include the test to stay along with that? Because last meeting, you guys basically came to the idea that you weren't going to be quarantining kids, that if it was going to be contact tracing and then we were going to let the parents know to be aware that your kid was in close contact, so keep an eye on them and let us know if something comes up. So we were pretty much going that route last meeting. We just been handed an amazing gift of test to stay that last meeting everyone would have been jumping for joy, like this is amazing, let's add test to stay. Instead of just letting the parents know, hey, your kid was in close contact, normally last year we were going to quarantine, but this year we're not going to because we noticed that there was hundreds and hundreds of kids getting quarantined that never ended up getting it. Well, now they could take that test and stay in school. So that's great. So my fear is that we're going to have numbers like we did last year, except we're going to start the school year now, everyone's leaning towards wearing the masks. Everything's going to look good. Well, why would we ever take the masks off? Everything looks good. Well, I think it would have came to the same way if we would have just did the test to stay along with making the mask optional. Encourage it as much as you want to the parents. We highly recommend this, but we're giving you the option to know what's best for your child. And along with that, if someone does catch, someone gets COVID, we're offering you the option to test to stay. That way your kid can stay in school. Now we're not doing massive numbers. Because it seems like that's the big hang-up is everyone's worried about the massive numbers of quarantining, especially from last year. Well, this would fix that, and we don't have to have the mask as a requirement. They could still be optional. I don't see why we can't do both. Why we're jumping to the extreme of, well, we're worried about the massive quarantining. We don't have to have the massive quarantining. We can do both. We could let the parents decide what's best for their kids, along with giving you this option. Hey, normally we were going to quarantine you a long time, but now you could take this test and pick and stay in.
Your time's up. Thank you.
So I just think that would be great, but thank you.
Hello, my name's Kim Saraki. I have 3 children in this district, and I've been keeping up with everything as you guys have been getting my emails. The CDC announced, what was it, last week or a week or 2 ago, that the PCR tests don't work. And then also, too, if they're saying that they're faulty, how do we know who really has COVID and who doesn't have COVID? And also, too, I've been keeping up with this. Under federal law, you cannot ask for the mask, the testing. So, just curious, it's under federal law, you can't be doing that. It should be optional. No one should be able to tell me what is best for my children. I've been raising my children for almost 14 years. I know what's best for my kids. It should be optional. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Carol Joy Kilpatrick. I have 2 kids in the district, one at Fulton and one who will start here at CMS in the fall. And I'm very happy to hear some of the stuff that's going on here today. I think this new test to stay is great. And I'm also really happy about masks. So, and that we'll be at least doing that till October, possibly longer, if the metrics say. So there's one point I want to make. And I don't know what it became so hard for us to ask our children to do things to keep each other safe. I work every day with my kids to try and get them to do things to keep each other safe. So asking them to wear masks to keep each other safe doesn't seem like that hard of an ask. So I just kind of think we should consider that. And I also think that a lot of the kids do want to wear masks. So anyways, thank you. I'm glad we're heading in this direction.
Hello. Lisa Giamona, 5th grade teacher at FIRC.
How you doing, Lisa?
I'm good, thank you. So I wanted to say just a couple of things. I love the conversation that's happening here. The first thing, and Dr. Staywick, you hinted at this, with all this stuff that we're doing, it's great, test to stay great, please get help for our nurses. Please get help for our nurses. It was insane. I'm surprised our nurses are coming back. I mean, just the amount of work and stress that went on the nurses last year with everything they had to do. Please get help for them. I really wanted to advocate for them because they're doing tremendous things to help keep everybody safe. So just get them some help. As far as the masks with kids and it being hard to get them to wear them or all that, I'm a parent of 3 kids from almost 8 to 2. She just turned 3 last week. My 3-year-old won't leave the house without a mask because that's all she remembers. Before the mask came, I was like, I'm not sending my kids to school with masks. There's no way they're going to be able to do that. How dare they ask me to do that? Guess what? My daughter is a competitive dancer. She dances for 9 hours a week at the age of 7, and she wears a mask every single moment of it. She has not died of CO2 poisoning. She has not complained about it one time. She told me she hates wearing the mask, but if it means she can go to school and be with her friends and learn and not have to be on a computer, she would do it. I had a class last year of 13 kids. 1 child tested positive for COVID. 9 of them had to be quarantined out of those 13. It's not fun. It's hard. Whatever we can do to not have to quarantine 1 million kids, I am an advocate for. And I think most of our teachers would be. Also, somebody said something about, teachers not having to wear a mask or whatever. If one of my students has to wear a mask, I'm wearing a mask because it's going to make them feel more comfortable to do it. So I want you to know, the teachers want our kids to be comfortable. I'm in an elementary school. Most of our kids aren't or all of our kids won't be vaccinated. So if some of them chose to wear a mask, we would choose to wear masks. That's just who we are in District 146. That's we care about our kids. So my biggest point coming up here, though,
30 seconds.
is that the kids will wear masks if we ask them to wear masks. They're not going to complain. My students didn't complain, not ever, not once. And those nurses need help. They really need help. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Price.
Hi, Jennifer.
As my husband had stated, I agree with him. I think this is a wonderful plan that they have in place, the test to stay. I would give anything for my kids to be in school. My kids were both, I have 2 young girls, 7 and 6, and they were both home all last year. My district was at home for the entire year. And I know all of my parents would have put masks on their kids gladly. They would have put 2 on their kids if it meant that we were able to be back in the building. That's all they wanted. We did mask practice every day in preparation for going back, and the kids would be on Zoom practicing their mask, and they could hear me fine. They were wearing it. We practiced, how to wear it properly. My kids wear it, no problem. All my daughters say every day is, I can't wait to be back in school. I can't wait to be back in school. And if that means that they have to wear a mask, they will gladly do it. I just ask, it's better for them, and I know this is my opinion, I'm not the only one that has it. I just ask, please do the right thing. As my husband said, it's only a mask, and I know there's such debate about it, but if it's a piece of cloth over your face. It's going to protect your children. It's going to protect my children, my students. I will do it every day. I will wear two, and my kids will wear it. My husband and I are both vaccinated. We still wear it. We're trying to help my daughters to understand the importance of it, which they do, which we've taught them. Parents are teaching their kids how to be safe. And, you know, sorry, I'm a little nervous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mrs. Wilson, Shane's wife. Dr. Stawick, I've been also doing research on the Delta strain, and I'm finding similar things as you. The contagious factor of it is very high, possibly higher than it was before in the Alpha strain. So definitely it is more contagious. We are seeing that 80% of the cases are the Delta strain, and it is raging right now. It's going very quickly. And my research also turned up, though, that in the United Kingdom, the children and the adults under 50 are 2.5 times more likely to become infected with Delta. So it is affecting a different age group than the first virus did. The Delta strain is going after kids. It is going after younger adults. Also, my research didn't turn up what yours did. It's showing that the severity of Delta is the same as the first strain, and it included a study from Scotland that showed that the Delta variant is twice as likely to result in hospitalization as unvaccinated. So obviously, it's a new thing. We're learning more, and there are things that we don't know. Rick asked, what is our exposure? And that was a very financial, legal liability question, but I would say the answer is every unvaccinated child is your exposure. They are exposed, especially if they are not wearing a mask, okay? The masks, the reason why that test to stay works with the masks is because the mask, when both people are wearing it, provides a very good mitigation. So I'm really hoping that you guys don't just make this a willy-nilly thing. Mandate the masks to protect the children who don't even have an option yet to be vaccinated. You've got a kid vaccine on the horizon. Once you get those kids vaccinated, then you can start talking about options and choices. And then lastly, I really like your idea, Darcia, about an opt-in registration, that you submit your COVID vaccine paper as an opt-in so that you have an opt-in database.
30 seconds.
That's, to me, I think that's something that many people would voluntarily want to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, Sandra Bailey. I wanted to bring a point that I have not heard yet, which is it seems to be all or nothing. Let's go to school, let's wear masks up. It was great. Last week we were masks down. Wonderful. So if we have to do the masks, which I understand if that's what you have to do, I don't like it whatsoever, because isn't it nice to see my nervous face? It's enjoyable, and wouldn't that be great for the teachers to be able to see the kids' faces again, to be able to see if they're looking frustrated, happy, sad. My child had an incident going on in school. The teacher didn't even know about it, that she was sad because she couldn't see her face. So, not a fan of the masks, but if you have to do it, you have to do it. I get that. Can we make let's get in the classroom and everybody's sitting down, take your masks off, let's learn mask-free. In the hallways, put your mask on. You got to go to the bathroom, put your mask on. In the classroom, let's unmask so the teachers can see the kids' faces. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ray Lasky. I would just say that the conversation really needs to go no further than the point that woman brought up right there about the PCR test not being reliable, and that we have that. We also don't need to use much more than common sense to know that masks have to be health damaging, if not from a just oxygen obstruction level, but a psychological and developmental health level. And you have the option to wear one if you're worried. You have the option to get vaccinated if you're worried. We have to always stand for our individual health freedoms and to be beacons of the message that people need to be responsible for their own health. If you have an issue, take a good, long, hard look at yourself and your daily life and ask yourself, what can I do to improve my chances of being resilient against the virus? Don't look at your neighbor like it's their responsibility, because you don't know what I'm doing to make myself and my family resilient against this virus. There are a ton, if this virus and this whole pandemic were a boat, it would not have made it off the dock. So at a certain point, I understand there are constraints by governmental entities on, well, what can we do and what are our options? But at the end of the day, the outcome that you're producing is very real for the kids and their development and their health. And the CDC has proven themselves to be nothing more than a clown show whose messaging changes depending on what election or midterm is coming up or whatever other agendas they might have. And they're not elected officials. And we know that the vaccines they push have very real harmful consequences. So, you know, the messaging goes for those people like, well, you know, we have to take those risks to account for the many that might be saved. Well, do the same, take the same attitude towards this contagion idea. Is that, hey, well, you know, if the few that are hurt by vaccines, that's just a necessary evil. Well, take the same approach to yourself with your worry about getting sick. Maybe you're the necessary evil. Because we have a lot of things to preserve that we're lucky to have in this country, and we need to be very cognizant right now of how we preserve that. So,
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
If I've understood the conversation, it seems like we are reluctantly but moving forward with the idea of starting the school year with masks required. And if I've understood you correctly, I commend you on that decision. I feel like Mr. Casper's wrong about one thing. He said the goal was to get the kids back in school. The goal was to get the kids back in school safely. And just to leave it to a recommendation is toothless. It's a paper tiger. All the proof you need of that is you. As Dr. Stewart pointed out, the CDC's recommendation is that everyone, vaccinated or unvaccinated, wear a mask in any indoor situation. Not one of you on the dais has decided to follow that recommendation. So that's how powerful a recommendation is. It's easily tossed aside. Believe it or not, you're educators. Some of you literally, but by the fact that you are parents, or that you are civic leaders, or the fact that you have been elected to this board, you are educating our community and our children. And if the goal is to actually get back to real normal school, if the goal is to end the pandemic, then we don't do that by just saying it's over. We don't do that by just saying, well, those numbers are true over there. Or we don't believe the numbers that we're seeing, or there's an agenda. We listen to the infectious disease specialists, and we follow the patterns, and we take actions based on that. I've heard you guys use the word proactive a lot. I've never seen a more reactive group of people. Every step you've taken has been in response to ISBH forcing you into doing something, or the rules changing. It's never proactive. If you want to be proactive, then you can take the steps that are necessary to actually reduce the spread of the virus. Then you can take the steps to protect everyone in K through 6 and partially into 7th grade who is not eligible for the vaccine that would protect them. You actually have the ability to recommend with force. You have the ability to recommend with action. You have the ability to lead by example, by instruction, and by governance. I know, 30 seconds. And I strongly encourage you to take advantage of your position, to take advantage of the pulpit, to follow the guidance of government officials if they're useful, of doctors and scientists where they're useful, of our fellow districts. Why do we think we know better than District 228 or District 230? What do we know that they don't? Put all that together, this is the right move. And until the numbers go in a different direction, until we go from orange to yellow, it will continue to be the right move. And I will be here to encourage you to make that right move. Thank you.
Thank you.
I did not. Thank you very much for reminding me. And that's my time.
Hi there, my name is Amy Hammernick, and I am thankful that the board has chosen to go this direction. I know it's not 100% willingly with the, hands tied kind of feeling behind it. And I do agree that there should be reevaluation down the line, looking at it in 7 weeks and see, looking at all the different variables that entail all that we're, battling. The only thing that I want to just point out and hope that you all remember in 7 weeks, and I may be here to remind you, is the benefit for the high level of education in the delivery of instruction when we are requiring masks. Students can be closer, teachers have more flexibility, the principals have a lot more options of how to manage their staff and the kids. That's a huge, huge success in this whole big world of just horrible things. And don't forget that, because that education piece always seems to be the last important part of the conversation. It really, truly, all of the things that Dr. Stawick said about being able to be closer, having all of those, we've got fabulous teachers in this district, but sometimes some of the things they want to do, they can't, because if those masks are off, those kids can't go that close together. They can't do those things. And while, yes, of course, the health of our children and whatever our opinions are of that is important to each of our own, the education is just as important. And that's how we get that, fill the gap that we've all lost. So please keep that in mind. That's a fantastic byproduct of us wearing masks.
Is there any way to make one more point? I know my time expired, but otherwise my wife didn't use her whole time sheet to make it. I just had one quick comment to make, if that was okay. I don't know if you want to talk about it or...
Fine with me. I don't care. Go on.
Well, the board is will allow it, but be cognizant, please, that you did already take your full 3 minutes.
I'll be respectful. And just really quickly, like I said, my name was David Saraki, but he just brought up a great point, is that the new guidance is that everyone who was vaccinated wear a mask indoors. Well, here we are today, no one's taking the guidance. We all made our own personal decision, what we think is best for us. I would like to do the same with my child. Everyone here, the new guidance says, wear a mask indoors. If you've been vaccinated, here we are today not doing it. Everyone made their own decision for themselves. I don't know if it's for convenience or personal choice not to do it. We're not doing it right now. So give me that choice with my child. That's all. Thank you.
More public comment. Okay, thank you to everyone who came out tonight. I'm going to just make a small editorial comment, but I did hear from a couple of public members that seemed to say that their presence here was a burden or some type of not welcome event to this board, and reminders that they may come back in some way. We welcome you back. I am adamant that we welcome all the public to our public forums, and we also welcome comments from the public to our emails. So please, do not think that this board is not listening. Do not think that the board does not welcome your comments, because they do. Thank you. 5.1, new business from the board? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Secretary call the roll.
Casper?
Yes.
Shalata?
Yes.
Lloyd, yes. Barry?
Yes.
Nenza?
Yes. We are adjourned.